Hello, welcome to Writing Matters. I'm Dr. Gabriela Blachowicz-Jones.
And I'm Bailey Sanford. And we are excited to continue a series of discussions on the history of writing and writing instruction.
Joining us today is Dr. Edgar Larrea, Assistant Professor of Spanish in the Department of English Languages and Media Studies. Today, Dr. Larrea will talk to us about the literature of Hispanic immigrants in the United States.
So, welcome to our show, Doctor.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, are there major themes that connect the works of Hispanic authors?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Yes, Hispanic authors, particularly in the United States, in the Latino community, articulate their identities as fluid, usually bicultural, resisting a monolithic definition. They frequently navigate the borders and margins, whether geographical, cultural, or linguistic, to define their own sense of self, often incorporating bilingualism or code switching, to reflect the hybrid nature of their experience. Some of the most common topics in Latino literature and culture in the United States have traditionally been migration, borders, exile, language hybridity, or code switching as it is normally known, and magical realism. Recently, in the last maybe 10, 15 years, other topics like gender, sexuality, cultural identification have also been important in Latino literature.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dr. Larrea, when we talked about this topic, I was very excited, and you recommended that I take a look at a Pulitzer Prize winning book by Diaz, and The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. So thank you so much. I was really impressed with this text. This novel follows the life of a Dominican young man from New Jersey. His name was Oscar de Leon, and we see Oscar as he looks for love, and as he battles a family curse. The novel is told from the perspective of Junior, Oscar's roommate, and also includes a lot of backstories about Oscar's family as that family suffered under the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. What really impressed me about this book, apart from the story, is the way in which the author blends languages into a unique style. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to sort of like read a very short passage as an illustration. So here we have a female character who talks about her relationship with her grandma. And sorry, the female character talks to her grandma about her relationships with her mother. So the character says, "She was very guapa," I said casually. Abuela snorted. "Guapa soy yo. Your mother was a diosa, but so cabeza dura. When she was your age, we never got along." All right. So we see here that the writer includes words such as guapa, which means beautiful, attractive, right? Diosa, which is like a goddess. Yeah, I'm beautiful, but your mother was a goddess, right? You say, well, your mother was so cabeza dura or hard-headed, stubborn. And then she says, she was cabeza dura and I was exigente. She was hard-headed, strong-minded, and I was strict.
Yeah.
So I was really impressed about the way in which, and we have countless such examples, the way in which the writer blends languages. How do you think this intertwining of English and Spanish speak to the writer's identity?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you liked Diaz. This is probably the most representative Latino writer in the U.S. these days. He comes from a Dominican background. He was born in the Dominican Republic, but he came to the United States, to New Jersey specifically, the area of Patterson, New Jersey, that is populated, maybe overcrowded, with Dominicans and Peruvians. This is an area that is has been famously recognized as a Dominican and Peruvian center of immigration. In the case of Junot, because he writes both in English and Spanish, mainly in English these days, which makes him available to everyone in the country, both academia and the general population. And despite his Dominican background, Diaz is probably the most important writer in the United States these days. Many authors tried to do it before him, and many more are doing it after him because of his literature and influence these days. Now, literature usually includes the stories of complex and tormented immigrant subjects to live in two worlds. No? The one they left behind in Spanish, and the new, hostile, different, frequently cruel English world. His literature represents the struggles most immigrants of any nationality in the U.S. must go through. This is not only a cultural, social reality, but also primarily linguistic. And this is probably where code switching has a very important role in his literature. And these days, for example, everybody has heard about Bad Bunny.
Yes.
Bad Bunny is doing exactly the same thing. He's using code switching to transmit, to represent in his case, Puerto Rican cultural background. No? By using code switching, in the case of You Know and You Not, authors like him challenge the monolingual literary or music standard, in the case of Bad Bunny, to validate their bicultural experience. Among these new generation of writers, apart from Junot, who's probably the most representative, we have many others these days. And surprisingly, among these many authors, many Latino authors in the United States, more than half, I don't have an exact number, but definitely the majority of these new writers are women writers. No? I can mention just a couple, like Claudia Cisneros, just one, Claudia Cisneros, and maybe Marifeo Bruche, who is a Peruvian writer.
So, thank you.
That is actually so interesting. So, Doctor, in the book that we just discussed, the protagonist is born in the United States. However, the novel makes multiple references to Oscar's family, who suffered under the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. A poignant backstory involves Oscar's grandfather, Abelard, who was in prison and eventually died after failing to bring his wife and daughter to a meeting with the government officials. And out of fear that the woman would have been kidnapped. So how do such accounts of generational experiences, both in the home country and the United States, shape the Hispanic writers' identities?
This is a very interesting question. I'm glad you asked. The main reasons most immigrants in general leave their countries to come here or any other country where they go to are usually three: political, economic, and occasionally religious. This makes immigrants' literary work denser in topics like poverty, war, abuse of all types, gangs, persecution, killings, etc. No? It is impossible, for example, these days to find Hispanic authors in the U.S. writing about love stories or science fiction, modernist poetry, writing odes to beauty or women. This is probably an important difference with Latino literature produced in the United States and the one produced in the other Spanish-speaking countries. Now, in the case of Junot, his experiences during the Trujillo regime, the dictatorship of Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, specifically impact on Abelardo Cabral and his family in Junot's Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. They shape his Hispanic identity by establishing a transnational identity, which is an important definition these days in cultural studies, where the past, the home country, is inseparable from the present, the United States. These narratives, often passed down as stories of inherited trauma or post-memory, serve as a creative, political, and personal foundation for defining identity amidst the diaspora.
That's very interesting.
Dr. Larrea, I was fascinated when I looked at the Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. I was fascinated to see that there's a fairly long commentary, almost like a preface to the book, which deals with the curse and the doom of the New World, which the author calls Foucault. All right, and it's really interesting because this curse follows pretty much all the characters in the book, and it seems that it's irrelevant as to whether or not somebody believes in it in this course.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just read just a little bit from this preface. Whether I believe in what many have described as the great American doom is not really the point. You live as long as I did in the heart of Fuku country, you hear these kinds of tales all the time. Everybody in Santo Domingo has a Fuku story knocking around their family. So he gives several examples. So it's perfectly fine if you don't believe in these superstitions. In fact, it's better than fine. It's perfect because no matter what you believe, Fuku believes in you.
Right.
So it's really fascinating because this course, the Fuku, sort of follows the characters in Diaz's novel. So, in your opinion, how does this aspect of magical realism influence the work of Diaz, and maybe how does it affect the identities of Hispanic writers in the U.S.?
Well, superstitions and the supernatural is something that is common to the Hispanic culture in general. In the Caribbean area, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, maybe, because of their African influence during the 16th to the 18th century, there was a big African influence. So the original superstitions from the natives combined with the African superstitions brought by the slaves produced this third set of superstitions, and the Fuku is probably the most important in the Dominican Republic. And it is very common to hear that. I mean, it doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. It's going to happen anyway. A recurring topic in Diaz's work is precisely the superstitions and the supernatural. These topics are part of the Latin American culture in general. Magical realism is probably the most important movement within Latin American literature. If we take the famous writers like Garcia Marquez, like Monterroso, they are probably the masters of this movement. Now, Junot uses magical realism in The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde as a tool for navigating historical trauma, merging the supernatural Fuku with the tangible, brutal history of the Dominican Republic. It shapes Hispanic identities by blurring boundaries between history and myth, allowing characters like Oscar to define the existence through a struggle against generational colonies or colonial curses. The narrator, Junior, which is the alter ego of Diaz, uses the narrative itself as a safa, which is the counter spell to the Fuku. Suggesting that storytelling and literature allow Spanish writers to reclaim control over their history and identity.
Thank you.
That is very interesting. And coming from just an Asian culture, on top of that, we have a lot of
All right.
our own very own superstitions. So it's kind of funny to see the resemblance. So Dr. Larrea, what do you think is the future of Hispanic literature, and how would you encourage your students to become engaged with the works of Hispanic authors?
Well, Hispanic literature in the world in general is growing tremendously. Now, here in the United States is really, really big. The United States has currently 65 Spanish speakers, 65 million Spanish speakers with 40 native and 20 bilingual million of speakers. This is definitely a big, big number. So the literature produced in the United States is only second to the literature produced in Mexico, which is the largest Spanish-speaking country with over 150, 160 million. So the number of Spanish speakers producing literature in the United States is larger than the ones in Argentina, in Colombia, even in Spain, in many cases. This number is very significant, as this means the U.S. Spanish writers are already producing probably the most prolific literature in the Spanish language, and this will only keep growing in the years to come. Here at UMES, in my Spanish classes, I try to expose my students to Spanish literature from the early beginning, from the basic courses. And of course, in the intermediate or more advanced courses, we read all these short stories, modernista movements, magical realism, which is completely or very different from the literature they read in English. And something that I did at the beginning was to include some short stories, some sometimes extracts from famous books, but eventually I basically use these as the main material for my classes these days. Students love them, they want to read more, they usually try to follow the authors, which is the main idea when you teach a literature class.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really
Thank you for having me.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I learned a lot. Doctor,
Yes, I
did
did
you?
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
So we just wanted to say thank you for watching and stay tuned for more episodes of Writing Matters.
Thank you.